We live in a world that praises thinkers, planners, analyzers, strategists. We're told to think before we act, to weigh every possibility, to avoid mistakes at all costs. And while that sounds responsible, there's a quiet danger hidden in that advice, because sometimes thinking becomes a substitute for doing. We start believing that the more we think, the better our outcomes will be. But what really happens is that our minds become cluttered with possibilities, and we lose the courage to take the first step. Overthinking disguises itself as preparation. It feels productive. It feels safe. You tell yourself you're just gathering information, waiting for the right time, the perfect plan. But the truth is you're building walls out of your thoughts, and then locking yourself inside them. You start running through every what-if scenario, and each one makes you feel a little less ready than before. The irony is that overthinking often begins with good intentions. You care deeply about getting it right. You don't want to waste time, effort, or resources. You want to avoid pain, rejection, or failure. But somewhere along the way, the search for certainty becomes the very thing that prevents progress. You end up in a loop, thinking, doubting, hesitating, then thinking some more, as if more analysis will one day eliminate all risk. But life doesn't work that way. The path forward only reveals itself through movement. Every great idea, every successful venture, every meaningful relationship started before someone had all the answers. The act of doing creates the clarity that overthinking promises but never delivers. Action is not the opposite of thought. It's the continuation of it. When we stay stuck in our heads, we're trying to control what can't be controlled. We imagine outcomes that haven't happened yet, trying to solve problems that don't even exist. The mind loves to protect us, but in doing so, it often shields us from growth. Overthinking is a way of saying, I'll act when it's safe. But nothing worth doing ever feels completely safe. The longer we stay trapped in analysis, the heavier our thoughts become. We start losing momentum, energy, and self-belief. The gap between what we know and what we do widens, and that gap becomes filled with doubt. Eventually, we confuse hesitation for logic, thinking that we're being wise when really we're just being afraid. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't knowing what to do, it's trusting ourselves enough to do it. Because deep down, we often already know the next step. The question is whether we'll give ourselves permission to take it. Overthinking tells us to wait until we're ready. But readiness is not something we find, it's something we create by moving. The trap of thinking too much is subtle because it feels like progress. But thinking alone doesn't build anything. Not a business, not a relationship, not a life. What builds is action guided by thought, not paralyzed by it. That's clarity before confidence is. You don't need confidence to start. You need clarity on why you're starting. We often wait for confidence like it's a bus that's running late. We stand still, hoping one day it will show up, and only then we'll finally move. But confidence isn't the starting point, it's the result of movement. The real foundation of action is clarity. When you understand why something matters to you, that purpose creates a direction strong enough to pull you forward, even when your hands are shaking. Confidence says, I know I can do this. Clarity says, I know why I must. And when your why is strong enough, you no longer need to feel brave before you act. You simply act because the reason behind it is too important to ignore. Every meaningful achievement begins not with certainty, but with conviction. A quiet decision that the purpose is worth the discomfort. Clarity cuts through noise. When you lack it, every choice feels like a gamble. You second guess, you overanalyze, you seek validation. But when you gain clarity, decisions become simpler, not easier, but clearer. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. The obstacles are still there, but now you can see where you're going. Most people think they're searching for confidence, but what they're really craving is direction. They say, I don't know if I can. When what they mean is, I don't know if this matters enough to me. The moment you reconnect with your purpose, the reason beneath the goal, the fear doesn't vanish, but it starts to make sense. It becomes a signal that you're moving towards something meaningful. Clarity doesn't come from thinking harder, it comes from asking better questions. Not what if I failed, but what would it mean if I never tried? Not what will people think, but what will I think if I let this moment pass? These questions bring your focus back to what truly matters, your values, your growth, your impact. When you see your why, clearly you stop measuring your worth by outcomes. You stop waiting for approval or the perfect plan. You realize that confidence is built through alignment. When your actions reflect your purpose, fear loses its power. And that alignment gives you the quiet courage to begin, even in uncertainty. Because clarity is not about having all the answers, it's about knowing the reason you're willing to look for them. Once you know why you're moving, the buy of how begins to unfold naturally. That's the power of small decisions. Progress is not born from massive leaps, but from small, deliberate steps. We love the idea of big moments, breakthroughs, turning points, overnight success. But if you look closer, those moments are rarely sudden. They're the visible result of countless small decisions made quietly, consistently, and often without applause. The truth is, transformation doesn't come from one grand gesture, it comes from choosing one small action and doing it again tomorrow. Small decisions might not look impressive, but they carry the greatest weight. Choosing to get up 10 minutes earlier. Choosing to make one phone call you've been avoiding. Choosing to spend 5 minutes writing, practicing, or planning instead of scrolling. These choices seem insignificant in the moment, yet they build a foundation stronger than any burst of motivation ever could. The mind loves to think in extremes. It tells us we need to do everything or nothing. So we wait for the perfect time, the right mood, the ideal circumstances. But perfection never arrives. The only real progress comes from lowering the bar enough to take a step today. Because one step forward is infinitely more valuable than 100 intentions left undone. Every time you make a small decision and follow through, you teach your mind something powerful: I can trust myself. That trust becomes momentum. And momentum, not motivation, is what sustains you when excitement fades. Each tiny step compounds, like drops of water carving through stone, slow, steady, unstoppable. The beauty of small decisions is that they remove pressure. You don't have to figure out the entire journey, you only need to decide the next right move. That's how mountains are climbed, one foothold at a time. And as you keep choosing progress over perfection, those small actions start to rewire your beliefs. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, and that identity fuels even greater change. Sometimes the smallest decision isn't external, it's internal, choosing to believe it's possible, choosing to forgive yourself for starting late, choosing to try again after failure. These are the decisions that reshape the story you tell yourself and in turn reshape your future. Big goals inspire us, but small steps transform us. Because success doesn't come from intensity, it comes from consistency. And every major shift in life begins with a simple, quiet choice to start, even if it's small. A turn fear into fuel, anxiety, and excitement feel the same. The difference is the story you tell yourself. Fear is not the enemy. It's a signal, a reminder that you're standing at the edge of something that matters. The same physical sensations that come with fear, the racing heart, the tightened chest, the surge of adrenaline, also appear when you're excited. The body doesn't know the difference. Only the mind decides what those sensations mean. When you choose to interpret them as possibility instead of danger, fear becomes energy you can use. Most people wait for fear to disappear before they act. But fear doesn't vanish, it evolves. The more meaningful the goal, the louder it gets. Fear shows up because you care, because you're about to step into something uncertain. And uncertainty is where growth lies. The goal, then, isn't to eliminate fear, it's to walk with it and let it guide you instead of stopping you. Think about it. Fear and excitement are two sides of the same coin. The difference lies in your story. When you say, I'm nervous, your mind braces for threat. When you say, I'm excited, it prepares for opportunity. That shift doesn't change the situation, but it changes your state. It moves you from paralysis to presence. Fear often carries information. It tells you what you value. You fear failure because success matters. You fear rejection because connection matters. You fear starting because the outcome means something to you. So instead of fighting fear, get curious about it. Ask, what is this trying to show me? That curiosity turns fear into focus. The most courageous people aren't fearless. They're fluent in fear. They've learned to use that energy as a signal to lean in, not back away. Each time you face what scares you, you reclaim a little more power from it. You build proof that you can act even while afraid. And that proof becomes confidence, not the fake kind that waits for comfort, but the real kind that grows from experience. There's a moment, right before you act, where fear is at its loudest. That's the threshold. Most people retreat there. But if you step through, if you take that one breath and move anyway, you discover that the feeling you were trying to avoid was never as big as your imagination made it. On the other side of fear isn't safety, it's freedom. When you learn to see fear as fuel, you stop running from it and start using it. You recognize that fear only shows up when you're on the edge of becoming more than you were. And that's not something to escape. That's something to embrace. Or set boundaries for your mind as overthinking thrives in open loops. Decide when to decide. The human mind is a powerful storyteller. It loves to keep the story running, to fill every silence with what ifs, maybes, and could-bes left unchecked. It will replay the past and play the future until the present moment disappears entirely. This is where overthinking grows, in the absence of boundaries. The longer you leave decisions open-ended, the more space your mind has to create noise. Boundaries aren't just for people, they're for thoughts too. When you set limits on how long you think about something, you give your mind structure. You turn endless loops into defined lines. Say to yourself, I'll think about this for 10 minutes, then I'll decide. It sounds simple, but that commitment forces clarity. It transforms decision-making from a swirl of uncertainty into a moment of focus. Without boundaries, your mind becomes a courtroom where every idea is tried and retried endlessly. You start building arguments for and against every possibility, hoping one day a verdict will appear. But decisions don't arrive by debate, they arrive by choice. At some point, you must step in as the judge and say, this is enough thinking, it's time to act. When you set mental boundaries, you also protect your energy. Every thought demands attention, and attention is fuel. If you spend it chasing every mental branch, you'll have nothing left for movement. Boundaries help you preserve that energy for what matters most. Action creation progress. It's not about thinking less, it's about thinking purposefully. Sometimes a boundary means limiting what you allow into your head in the first place. What you read, watch, and listen to feeds your thoughts. If you constantly consume uncertainty and comparison, your mind will echo it back to you. Protect your input to protect your clarity. Mental peace is not built through isolation but through intention. Deciding what deserves your attention and what doesn't. It's easy to believe that more time thinking will lead to better answers. But often, it only leads to heavier thoughts. Boundaries remind you that clarity comes from containment. Like water, thoughts are powerful when guided, destructive when left to flood. When you define when to think, how long to analyze, and when to move, you reclaim control of your own mental landscape. Overthinking loses its strength when you create structure. Because once your mind knows there's a finish line, it starts working toward resolution instead of rumination. Boundaries don't restrict your mind, they free it from the weight of indecision and the illusion that thinking alone will ever be enough. As action over perfection, waiting for perfect conditions kills momentum. Imperfect action creates it. Perfection sounds noble. It promises control, mastery, and certainty. But perfection is a mirage. Every time you get close, it shifts a little further away. The pursuit of it keeps you busy but not productive, cautious but not creative. When you wait for things to be perfect, you end up waiting forever. Progress, on the other hand, is messy, uncomfortable, and full of mistakes. But it's real. We're taught to equate excellence with flawlessness. Yet the two couldn't be more different. Excellence is built on learning, and learning requires imperfection. The people who make meaningful impact rarely start with perfect conditions. They start with imperfect steps. They stumble, adjust, and grow. What separates them is not genius, it's the willingness to move while things are still unclear. Perfectionism often hides fear of judgment, failure, or not being enough, so we tell ourselves we're just not ready yet. We tweak, polish, and plan endlessly, hoping that one day we'll feel certain. But certainty doesn't come before action, it comes because of it. Every attempt teaches you something that thinking never will. Every mistake shapes the next move. Imperfect action has momentum built into it. Once you start, you create feedback. Feedback creates learning. Learning builds confidence. Confidence fuels more action. It's a cycle, one that perfectionism never allows to begin. The goal isn't to get it right, it's to get it going. Because motion, even small motion, reveals what thinking alone cannot. Perfection also kills creativity. When you demand flawlessness, you leave no room for curiosity. You stop experimenting because you fear breaking something. But creativity thrives in broken spaces, in trial, in error, in discovery. The most innovative ideas often come from what didn't work first. To chase perfection is to reject the very process that leads to excellence. Every masterpiece once looked like a draft. Every expert once felt like an amateur. The bridge between the two was not perfection, but persistence. It was the decision to keep moving, refining, and improving through action. Each imperfect step became a building block for something greater, something only possible because they started before they were ready. When you value action over perfection, you stop seeing mistakes as failures and start seeing them as data. You begin to trust the process of doing. You learn that progress is not about flawless execution, but about relentless iteration. And that the courage to begin, despite imperfection, is far more powerful than the illusion of getting it all right before you do. Trust the process, not the outcome. When you detach from results, you free yourself to truly move. We live in a culture obsessed with outcomes. The promotion, the recognition, the goal achieved. We measure our worth by what we can prove, what we can show, what we can post. But the danger in chasing outcomes is that they are always moving targets. The moment you reach one, another appears on the horizon. If you tie your sense of progress to results, you'll never feel finished, only temporarily satisfied. Trusting the process means shifting your focus from what you get to who you become along the way. It's about value in the act of showing up, not because it guarantees success, but because it shapes you. Every challenge, every setback, every repetition adds something invisible: resilience, discipline, perspective. These are the quiet rewards that no outcome can replicate. When you chase results, you create pressure. You start to force progress, and that pressure often leads to frustration or burnout. But when you trust the process, you learn to surrender control. You realize that outcomes are just byproducts of consistent effort. You stop demanding instant proof and start building long-term growth. Progress becomes less about pace and more about persistence. The process is where truth lies. It's where you face your doubts, refine your skills, and understand your limits. The outcome is just a snapshot, a single frame of a much larger story. If you focus only on the result, you miss the transformation that happens in the middle. And often, that transformation is the real reward. Trusting the process doesn't mean you stop caring about goals. It means you stop being controlled by them. You still aim high, but you don't let the fear of not reaching the finish line keep you from running. You understand that growth happens in motion, in the act of doing, not in the comfort of waiting. There will be days when results don't show up, when effort feels invisible. That's where most people quit, believing the process isn't working. But growth is rarely visible in real time. Seeds take root long before they break the surface. The The same is true for your effort. Unseen progress is still progress. When you trust the process, you begin to find peace in the present moment. You stop measuring every step and start appreciating the path itself. Because the process, the repetition, the practice, the persistence, is what builds the strength to handle whatever outcome arrives. As momentum creates clarity, thinking doesn't create clarity. Moving does. We often believe that clarity must come before action, that we have to figure everything out before we begin. But the truth is, movement itself is what reveals the path. You can't steer a parked car. Only when you start moving can you see which turns make sense. Clarity isn't something you find while sitting still, it's something you uncover by taking the next small step forward. When you act, you gather information that thinking alone could never give you. Each step, no matter how uncertain, brings feedback. You learn what works, what feels right, and what doesn't fit. That feedback sharpens your vision. It turns abstract ideas into real experiences, and those experiences refine your direction. The mind plans, the body learns, and the two must work together for clarity to emerge. Momentum has a power that thought alone can't replicate. Once you begin, even with hesitation, energy starts to build. The very act of doing breaks the spell of doubt. You stop being trapped in questions and start finding answers through movement. Momentum doesn't just create progress, it creates understanding. We think we need perfect certainty to move, but what we really need is permission. Permission to begin before we're ready. Because readiness doesn't precede action, it's born from it. Each small motion strengthens your confidence, not because you've eliminated fear, but because you've proven to yourself that you can act despite it. The first few steps are often the hardest, not because the path is unclear, but because standing still has become comfortable. Movement invites risk. It exposes you to feedback, to imperfection, to the unknown. But it's also what awakens creativity and resilience. The more you move, the more your mind adapts, and the more clearly you begin to see where to go next. Momentum is the bridge between uncertainty and clarity. Every moment you spend in action adds another piece to that bridge. You don't need to know every step ahead, you only need to keep taking the one in front of you. Because once you're in motion, the fog begins to lift. Clarity isn't found in thinking harder, it's earned through doing. Movement transforms confusion into insight, hesitation into rhythm, and fear into direction. And once you start moving, even imperfectly, you'll realize the clarity you were waiting for was waiting for you to begin.